And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Welcome to the Republic News Network live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I will be acting as your moderator. It is June the 2nd of 2016, and tonight's RNN featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing these radio shows for about 6 years, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. It is true, the United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction lies within the District of Columbia. And you can find this information at Title 28, Section 3002 and UCC 9-307H. The Republic government was just a bunch of U.S. citizens that realized they wanted to be Americans, as our founders intended. We've been hard at work for 8 years and have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know it's hard to understand. Don't worry, we are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government. You can consider the Republic members are tired of all the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there are, in fact, two forms of government here on our land, and we did something about it. We're people, just like you, mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too can participate and be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel on the Republic for the United States of America. Before we go into broadcast tonight, please bow your head with us in prayer. Father God, I want to thank you for this opportunity to serve you in any capacity necessary to reestablish this government. Lord, help us to understand really truly what's happening in this country, and help the people as a body wake up and no longer just be asleep and be sheep. Lord, we need to stand under one God as a nation, arm in arm, against tyranny. Lord, bless this call, bless our week. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Mr. Dan Happel, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Kelby. This week's program will be, I think, pretty exciting. We've got a gentleman that is nationally and internationally renowned as a speaker. He's the president of the John Birch Society. He's been in that role for quite some time, I believe since about 92. And this gentleman is named John McManus, and I have seen him speak a number of times personally, and he's just an outstanding speaker. And he is a gentleman who is extremely connected when it comes to exposing the issues of the New World Order. And, of course, the John Birch Society has been very much a pro-Constitution, anti-UN organization for a very long time, well, since its inception. And it is a group of really outstanding patriots. And I hate to admit it, but I suffered from the same well, let's call it propaganda that a lot of people have, and that was that I had always heard that the John Birch Society was a bunch of right-wing radicals, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists, and so forth. And back, I'm going to say about 12 or 15 years ago, I started to delve a little deeper into what the John Birch Society was all about, and lo and behold, I found out that they were just a solid bunch of patriots that really care a great deal about our country and care a great deal about bringing us back to our roots in the Constitution. And so with that said, I would like to introduce our guest for this evening, Mr. John McManus. John, take it from there.
Hello, Dan. Nice to be with you.
Well, thank you. We've got an interesting show tonight because we're going to talk about all the secret societies and the things that have happened, I guess, in front of everyone, but yet at the same time completely behind our backs. And this is something I know that you've written a great deal about over the years, and I know that you have probably a better understanding of this than just about anybody. And so what I'd like to do is lead in. I've got a quote that I would like to lead into this program with, and then I'll turn it over to you. And that is a quote from H.G. Wells' book, The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution. And this is in 1928. The political world of the open conspiracy must weaken, efface, incorporate, and supersede existing governments. The open conspiracy is the natural inheritor of socialist and communist enthusiasms. It may be in control of Moscow before it is in control of New York. The character of the open conspiracy will now be plainly displayed. It will be a world religion, unquote. And that was 1928. So with that said, John, would you like to lead us into maybe a little bit of the background of the Illuminati and some of the groups that have started the process early on when we were really in our infancy as a country?
Fine, I'll be happy to do that. Let me first of all define conspiracy. What is a conspiracy? A conspiracy is a movement by more than one person for an evil purpose in secrecy. So there's three elements. There's more than one person. There's an evil goal, and excuse me, and there's secrecy involved. The word itself comes from the Latin conspiro, con together, spiro to breathe, and the word conspiracy could be defined as breathing together. And it has come down with a meaning that means breathing together in secret behind closed doors for an evil purpose. So, have there been conspiracies throughout history? Absolutely. You can even find them in the Holy Scripture. To ignore the fact of conspiracy throughout history is to ignore one of its main engines. There have been conspiracies all throughout history, and there is conspiracy today. The conspiracy that we oppose today, we trace back to May 1st of 1776 in Bavaria, the southern part of Germany, when a man named Adam Weishaupt formed the Order of the Illuminati for the purpose of ruling the world. He was a professor at a Catholic university in Ingolstadt. He took issue with the leadership of the university and decided that the world would be better off if he ran it. So he formed the conspiracy of the Illuminati, the enlightened ones, I guess you could say, on May 1st of 1776. And that, incidentally, May 1st, that is why communists and socialists worldwide celebrate May Day. Most of them don't even know why, but that's why they do so. May Day is traceable back to May 1st of 1776 and the Illuminati. Now, the Illuminati began organizing on a principle which could be called concentric circles of power and influence, leading to the central circle, a small knot of people. Or you could describe it by looking at a pyramid. A pyramid, of course, is wide at the bottom, successive layers up to the top where there are very few stones. And the conspiracy of the Illuminati could be described with a pyramid, as well as concentric circles of power and influence. Weishaupt very quickly organized dissidents throughout Germany and then into France and in other countries in Europe. He successfully took control of continental European Masonry at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad in Germany in 1783. The Illuminati was discovered in Bavaria when a courier for the organization was struck by lightning while traveling on horseback. The authorities went and picked up the man's dead body and his briefcase. And in his briefcase were very incriminating documents, so much so that the government in Bavaria outlawed membership in the Illuminati under penalty of death. They considered it that strongly. The Illuminati was successful in bringing on the French Revolution and the terror in France, 1789. France has never recovered from that. The Illuminati then started various organizations in different countries, France and Italy and Germany, of course. It spread. There was even traces of the Illuminati in the United States, according to no better authority than George Washington himself. In 1798, 2 books were published, one called Proofs of a Conspiracy by an English professor named John Roberson. A copy of his book was given to Washington by a preacher in Maryland. Washington wrote back to him and thanked him for the book and said, I have no doubt that the conspiracy of the Illuminati exists in our own country. The second book that was written in 1798 was written by a French priest who had fled for his life out of France and wrote his book while in England. His book is called The History of the Jacobins. His name was the Abbe Augustin Baruel, Barruel, Baruel. And Baruel and Roberson had never met, and the information that they both published about the Illuminati was very much in sync. There was no dispute between what was said by either of them. The Illuminati continued to grow in power and influence, had some influence over Napoleon, even though he didn't know it himself. And pretty soon the leadership of the conspiracy transferred to Italy, a man named Giuseppe Mazzini, Mazzini. Mazzini formed organizations in various countries called Young Italy, Young France, Young England, and there was even a Young United States. Now we're into the middle of the 1800s, and we continue on and see the effect of the Illuminati and various people speaking out about it. Get into the 20th century and you find Winston Churchill, a rising political figure in England in 1920, speaking out about Spartacus and the Illuminati, Spartacus being the code name for Adam Weishaupt. So on and on we move. Mm-hmm. We get up today to a book written by a professor at Georgetown University in 1966, I believe it was, a book called Tragedy and Hope. This man named Carroll Quigley wrote his book, and he talked about a secret society to rule the world. He never used the term Illuminati, but he talked about it, and he said that its organization within the United States is the Council on Foreign Relations, which the John Birch Society has taken great effort to try to expose. So we've moved from 1776 all the way up into our present time. Does the Illuminati still exist? I believe something like it. If not, the Illuminati itself exists and has a powerful grip on much of what happens in our country and throughout the Western world. So there's a little bit of a historical entree, and I would guess that it has probably opened up more questions than it has answered, so I'll turn it back to you.
Well, John, actually, you're really covering a broad sweep here, and Carol Quigley's Tragedy and Hope, there's some quotes in there that are, of course, you've used in some of your programs too, but I am going to use one of his quotes from the book. It's, there does exist and has existed for a generation an international network which operates to some extent in the way the radical right believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network, which we may identify as round table groups, has no aversion to cooperating with communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operation of this network because I have studied it for 20 years and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. I have no aversion to it or most of its aims, and have for much of my life been close to it and to many of its instruments. I have objected both in the past and recently to few of its policies, but in general my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And that's getting into the various secret societies, and I think if we want to talk about how many there are literally dozens of them, but there are some that are at the very top of the list. And I've got very dear friends who are Masons, but I know the Masonic order, certain segments have had close connections with the Illuminati. Certainly the Fabian Society, the Round Table groups, Cecil Rhodes and Milner's Round Table groups, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the British counterpart, the Royal Institute for International Studies, and then groups like the Skull and Bones Society at Yale University, and the Bilderberger Group, which is a group that was formed after World War II by the Dutch royalty, and it was to meet every year to bring the top leaders of the world together in secret to talk about and define the direction that the world should move. And then there's groups like Bohemian Grove, Trilateral Commission. Actually, our Federal Reserve is one of those fairly secret groups because they meet in secret. And then I guess, John, one of the things that I would bring into this is the tax-exempt foundations and the non-governmental organizations that are now becoming the fourth branch of government, because they're making laws through administrative branches that are completely beyond the reach of our elected officials. And
absolutely.
Would you like to kind of discuss how some of these various groups have been working? Well,
let me refer instead to a remarkable editorial that appeared in an American newspaper called the Christian Science Monitor. This occurred in June 19 of 1920. And the beginning of the editorial talked about upheaval going on in the world. And it finally got down to a part here where I'll quote. The editorial said, "Anybody who will for a moment turn to the outpourings of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati may satisfy himself that this is what we're talking about." He mentioned John Robeson, the British professor who wrote the book in 1798, the editorial did. And it went on to describe the goals of the Illuminati. And this was mostly taken from Robeson. And these included the obliteration of Christianity, the deification of sensuality, the proscription of property, the abjuration of all religion and morality, the repudiation of marriage, and as a necessary corollary, the state adoption of children, universal license and the wrecking of civilization and giving over of society to general plunder. Now, what they're saying here is that their intention was to destroy the old order being morality and family values and so forth. All of this would be under attack. It came under attack in the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Karl Marx was financed by a group of people who were obviously tied to the very conspiracy we're talking about. He was paid by them to put together a plan for world rule. They called it the Communist Manifesto. And the breakup of the old order of morality governing the people, limited government as best as it could be found anywhere in the world, and then to bring on a new order, a new world order, in fact. The New World Order is something that President George H.W. Bush made so common mention of it in the walk-up to the war, the first war in Iraq in 1991. He kept saying that we had to have a new world order, and he always referred to the United Nations as what he wanted to see directing that new world order. So we've got all these things that we can only touch upon them here in a short recounting of some of these efforts over a radio station, but there are many, many books that certainly give credence to the theory that I'm proposing, and others have proposed for many, many years. Now, what we see happening in our own country today is an attack on the old order, order which would be religious values, cultural codes, and so forth. Just to give you an idea of where we are in this situation, we see that early in 2015, Hillary Clinton went to the United Nations, where she spoke to an adoring crowd at the Women in the World Summit. This was early in 2015 now. She knew that the people in front of her were homosexuals, transgender, and abortion advocates, and so forth. And so she turned to American people, turned her thoughts to the American people, and she said that deep-seated cultural codes, religious beliefs, and structural biases have to be changed. Incredible, really, when you stop and think about what that means. That is the New World Order. That is the casting out of the old order and the building of a new world order. I would hope that an opponent of hers for the presidency of the United States would use that quote that she stated from her speech at the United Nations in 2015, early 2015. Now, the New World Order is to be a world government, including the United Nations, run by the United Nations with all power gravitating toward it. It's one of the reasons why the John Birch Society for many, many years has called for get us out of the United Nations. And we've had success in that more and more people now understand that the United Nations is to be the seat of a one world government, the destruction of all sovereignty, all independent nations, and the merging of all of them into this one great big world government run by the UN. This is a goal that was expressed by Weishaupt and the Illuminati as much as 240 years ago.
Right.
It continues today.
Well, John, I think that was the reason that George Herbert Walker Bush, I believe, one of the reasons that he was defeated by Bill Clinton was that statement about the New World Order. I know a lot of the people that I knew that were Bush supporters. Boy, they soured in a heartbeat when he kept opining about the New World Order. And
yeah, he said it over and over again. I mean, there are 6 or 8 different times when he formally stated that in speeches that were televised and comments that he made and so forth. There's another aspect of this thing that should be known too, and that is maybe your listeners could take out a dollar bill and let's talk about the symbols on the back of the dollar bill. Mm-hmm. If we do that, we see the slogan Novus Ordo Seclorum right there, which is literally translated a new order of the ages, but has been more frequently New World Order. And I describe the Illuminati conspiracy as a pyramid or concentric circles leading to the center. We see on the back of the dollar bill a pyramid with the eye at the top and the all-seeing eye, as they call it, and the slogan Novus Ordo Seclorum at the bottom, New Order of the Ages, meaning New World Order. At the bottom of the pyramid, you see Roman numbers, and if you know Roman numbers, you can add them up, and they say 1776. Not for the 4th of July, but for May 1st, 1776. Above the pyramid, we see the phrase Annuit Chaeptus. Annuit Chaeptus means let our undertaking be favored. And it's kind of a prayer. Whether it's a prayer to God or a prayer to Satan is certainly something to consider. Now, what's interesting about that is that this is the Great Seal of the United States. The front of the Great Seal is the eagle with the arrows in one hand and the olive branch in the other. But the backside of the Great Seal of the United States, which is, of course, the left part of what's on the back of the $1 bill, is the slogan and the symbol of the Illuminati. Where did that come from? How did that happen? How did it get on the dollar is the question. Right. Well, what happened is that when our country was being run by the Articles of Confederation, there was an office within that called the Secretary of Congress. We don't have that office anymore. When we shifted to the Constitution of the United States, they didn't include an office that would be in the hands of any one person. So Secretary of Congress at the time was a man named Charles Thompson, and he was directed by the leadership of the Articles of Confederation, the government of the United States at the time, to put together a Great Seal. And it was under his leadership that this Great Seal became part, that the pyramid in the eye and the slogan Novus Ordo Seclorum and the 1776 Roman numbers, it's under his leadership that all of that was put together. We don't know much more about Charles Thompson other than the fact that he was in charge of it. I don't know that he was an artist or that he drew it up himself, but he obviously commissioned some people to do so. Does that mean that there were Illuminati influences within the United States at that period in time? Absolutely. Now, that symbol was not well known, but it got put on the dollar bill in the early first term of the Roosevelt administration, when Henry Wallace, vice president to Franklin Roosevelt, a man who, if he wasn't an actual communist, was cheating them out of dues, I guess we could say, when he was responsible for putting the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the $1 bill. And from that day forward, he was accused by many people, or thought by many people, to have been mixed up in occult organizations, one of which, of course, would have been the Illuminati, but we don't know that the Illuminati under that name was operating under that name at the time, but that the fact that the Illuminati had influence, even if it was under some other name at the time, cannot be denied. And that's the great seal of the United States, and everybody in our country carries that around with him on the back of the $1 bill.
Isn't that amazing that we've got something as closely linked to our entire financial system, and of course I think we all recognize that Federal Reserve is kind of a secret society in itself, because for the first time in maybe the last, I'm going to say within the last 5 or 6 years, most Americans, I believe, actually understand that the Federal Reserve is not part of the federal government, not a federal agency, but a private banking corporation, and that it is owned by individuals, and that some of those individuals, in fact, under some reports, most of those, the largest percentage are foreign banking individuals. And so...
Well, I don't know that, and I'm not sure that anybody knows that, because the Federal Reserve has never been audited. It's 100 years old. It was started in 1913, so this year it will be 103 years old. And it has control of the money system in the United States. It decides how much money will be printed, and therefore what the value of the money is. The money used to be backed by gold. It used to be backed by silver. Now it's backed by nothing. And the amount of it that can be issued is up to the Federal Reserve. But it's never been audited. There's a move in Congress right now that was started by former Congressman Ron Paul and has been picked up by some others to get the Federal Reserve audited so that the American people know exactly how it operates, what it does, and who its owners are, and so forth. I would suggest to anybody listening that they contact their congressmen and their senators and say, hey, it's about time to audit the Federal Reserve. The American people ought to know who runs this thing and what's happening with it. So there's another whole program we could talk about on just the Federal Reserve. Well, is the Federal Reserve part of the conspiracy against the United States? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't see any other way around it. I'm old enough to remember when $1 was worth a lot of money. I can remember with an old clunker of a car that I had, driving into a gas station and asking for $1 worth and getting 5 gallons, and the guy checked my oil and wiped my windshield.
Right.
That's been so gasoline still costs the same amount, but the value of the money is different. The value of the money has been perverted by constantly issuing more and more of it. And it soon will have no value at all. And that would bring on a lot of chaos in this country, that's for sure.
Well, it will, and one of the things that's kind of part of that conspiracy is the way we were taken off of the gold standard, and how under...
That was done by Franklin Roosevelt just simply signing a piece of paper.
Right, exactly, by executive
happened in
order.
The 30s, and then, of course, we had silver-backed currency until 1971, and when Richard Nixon took us off that. So now we have paper money backed by nothing.
Well, it's not backed by nothing, because that's the downside, is that it's backed by the property and the labor of the citizens of the United States. And I think that is when people realize that we are nothing more than chattel. We are being treated as collateral for all this money that the politicians and the elite are spending. And the bottom line is, I think most people don't realize there really isn't such a thing as free money. It's all got obligations tied to it, and we are about to find out just exactly how much those obligations are going to impact Americans.
Right. Well, what are the steps that a conspiracy will take in order to build world power? Well, the steps would be to increase government control over business and private citizens, control of the money supply, control of the military, and so on. I give a speech on the United Nations, and I show in my speech how the United Nations is now where we go for authorization to take military action anywhere in the world. We don't go to the Constitution of the United States. We don't declare war anymore. The last declaration of war, which is something, of course, called for by the Constitution of the United States, we should never go to war until there's a declaration of war. But the last time that was done was right after the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor in 1941. And incidentally, after that declaration of war, we won the war. In fact, there were two wars. There was a war in Europe and there was a war in the Pacific. We won two wars at the same time. And once having declared war, there was no other way to end it except through victory. But we didn't declare war in Korea. We didn't declare war in Vietnam. We didn't declare war in Iran or in Iraq, The first time or the second time, we haven't declared war in Afghanistan, and on we go. And these are endless wars. And in the process, we bankrupt the American people, and we get a lot of people killed. There's no doubt about that. But we transfer power to the United Nations. And that's what has happened. And getting out of the United Nations, which is the seat of the world government sought by the conspiracy for all of its existence, getting out of it is absolutely imperative. More and more people are beginning to realize that there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with the United Nations. And we in the John Birch Society, we take credit for that. We take credit for alerting an awful lot of people. We've still got a long way to go, though. We've got to alert a lot more people. And that's why I go on radio shows like yours, Dan.
Right. Well, and we are going to take a very short break here, Kelby. And when we get back from that break, John, I'd love to pick up where you just left off.
Okay.
A story of a common family. So my daughter asked me a very important question. She said, "Dad, why do you work so hard on this republic?" And I answered her, "Well, baby, the republic as given by our founding fathers is the most important form of government ever given to man." She said, "Dad, why don't you let somebody else do it?" I said, "Well, sweetheart, most of America thinks things are okay. And so long as their lives are not upset, they don't have to care about the important things that are taking place in their own country. Your dad likes to do things. I just don't want to sit and wait for somebody else. And if we didn't have our founding fathers, we wouldn't have this country. They were doers. They wanted something great for their children and grandchildren. And sweetheart, so do I." Ladies and gentlemen, I wish I could say that that's what happens in almost every home of our country, but it's not. Just 8 years ago, as a man who watched an $800 billion bailout given to banks when that money could have paid off every home in foreclosure in this country, which would have resulted in the banks getting the money anyway, I realized that we had a problem. And I stood up and I did something about it. I'm asking you to do something about it. I'm asking you to not just listen to these phone calls. I'm asking you to go to republicfortheunitedstates.org and read the Declaration of Sovereign Intent. Understand what we have done over the last 8 years. Understand what our intention is, what we are desiring to do for the people of this nation. And do something about it. Participate in the phone calls. Participate in building your states. Participate in finding a governor, finding a leader, finding the body politic of people that are going to stand up and build the de jure state. This is what we need. We need you to do something about it. We need you to be doers. Wednesday night of every week, we have a Building the States phone call at 6 p.m. Pacific. We encourage you to get on this phone call and understand how you too can be a doer. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Kelby. Now, I guess, John, where you were discussing about the UN and the role of the John Birch Society in exposing the power grab by the UN, I'd like you to maybe explain or discuss how there's always this attraction to socialism and to communism and Marxism whenever we're dealing with the UN. Somehow world government always goes back to a collectivist mentality, and why we need to expose that collectivist mentality and how a lot of that's being done through these organizations that we're talking about, these secret societies.
Well, the goal of the conspiracy that we've been talking about was to rule the world. Very simply, to centralize all power in a few hands at the top of a pyramid or at the center of concentric circles, whichever way you want to look at it. And the United Nations is that. There was an earlier try at a world government organization called the League of Nations, but the League of Nations was defeated by the U.S. Senate. We never got involved. The United States never got involved in the League of Nations. And because it did not, the League of Nations never really amounted to much. But the terrible carnage that occurred during World War II led to an awful lot of people being subjected to a propaganda barrage that essentially said, we've got to try something new. We've got to do something different. I'm old enough to remember that period. I remember my own dad, who was a very patriotic American, saying, yeah, well, let's give this UN, United Nations thing a try. Let's give it a go. So the attitude was, we don't want to have another world war. We've had World War I, and then we've had World War II. We don't want to have World War III. Maybe this is what we ought to do, the United Nations. And that attitude spread not only through the American people, but through the Congress, so that when the vote was taken by the Senate to ratify the UN Charter and get us into as a member of the new United Nations organization, the vote in the Senate was 89 in favor and only 2 against. There were only 2 senators who said no. And the 2 are unknown to almost every American. The 2 are William Langer of North Dakota and Henrik Shipstad of Minnesota. These 2 men had read the charter, and they knew what was there. They saw the reality of it, and they said, no, we don't want to do that. We don't want to get involved in this United Nations. Let me just read here what William Langer, one of the 2 senators who voted against the UN, he said, I would unhesitatingly vote for the Charter if I felt that it offered even the tiniest hope of a permanent peace. But I feel from the bottom of my heart that the adoption of the Charter will mean perpetuating war. He said, I believe it is fraught with danger to the American people and to American institutions. He's been proved right. Shipstead of Minnesota said essentially the same thing. He said the Charter is a war document, not a peace document. It makes it practically certain that we shall have future wars, and as to such wars, it takes from us power to declare them, to choose on which side we shall fight, to determine what forces and military equipment we shall use in the war, and to control and command our sons who do the fighting. Now, there's many instances where you can see that this is exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. In the Korean War, that war had essentially been won. General MacArthur, with the brilliant landing at Incheon, cut the supply lines to the North Korean army. And he liberated all of South Korea and North Korea as well. And the war was essentially over. But at that point, Chinese Communist forces massed across the border in Manchuria. MacArthur had plans to interdict them and a way to stop them. And he was fired. He was not allowed to proceed. They swarmed across the borders. A Chinese general, many years later, said, I would never have sent my men if I knew that, if I didn't know that Washington would restrain General MacArthur. He knew that MacArthur would be restrained. How did he know that? Well, the plans that we had for military action in Korea went through the United Nations. And the United Nations military leaders at the time were Soviet communists. There's no doubt about it. The whole charter of the UN was put together by two men, Gromyko Wyszynski from the Soviet Union and Alger Hiss from the United States. Wyszynski was a known communist. Alger Hiss was later found out to have been a communist loyal to the Soviet Union, not to the United States. But the United Nations, right from the beginning, was very, very bad, and it continues to be so. Every time I get into this, somebody will say, but they feed hungry children. And I say, well, no, they really don't feed hungry children. What they do is they give money to governments that have been destroying freedom for the hungry children, and occasionally some of the money is used to buy a couple of meals for the children. But it also empowers the leaders to be submissive to the United Nations. So everything about it is bad, and that's what needs to be said. So the world government intended that there be a world government organization, and that organization is the United Nations. That's why the John Birch Society has for years been saying, get us out of the United Nations.
Right.
And the sooner the better.
You're right about the so-called feeding of hungry children. I think we've created more hungry children through the UN than ever would have existed had that organization.
Well, no, the money that is sent is never sent to the children. It's never sent to the parents or whatever. It's sent to the governments, and the governments that have destroyed the ability of the people to feed themselves in various countries, especially in Africa. Mm-hmm. These are the very people who receive the money, and it empowers them. Right. It empowers them over the people that they are ruling, and so forth. Now, one of the things that we didn't discuss when we were talking about the history of this conspiracy was the actual financing and promotion of Karl Marx and Engels in their Communist Manifesto. Did they call for a world government? Yes, of course they did, under the name of communism. Is communism something that was created by this conspiracy? Absolutely. Is socialism also? Yes. In fact, communists and socialists have always fought with each other over who really owns the Communist Manifesto. And we find out that 40 years after the Communist Manifesto was published, one of the authors, Engels, said we wanted to call it the Socialist Manifesto, but we decided for other reasons to call it the Communist Manifesto. But it's been the Bible, so-called, of communists and socialists all the years. What does it say? Well, you look at the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, and you see a graduated income tax, you see a central bank, you see takeover of the schools, you see abolition or eventual abolition of all rights of inheritance and so forth. And you see this social intent here. The Communist Manifesto says it in its own pages. It says that it abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality instead of constituting them on a new basis. It acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. So the attack on the old order by the communists Yes, and as I mentioned before in that remarkable editorial from the Christian Science Monitor, it mentions the attack on the old order, attack on the family, attack on marriage, attack on children, and so forth. And this is what's going on. And now being promoted by none other than Hillary Clinton. And, of course, Bernie Sanders is himself a self-professed Marxist. He, for many years, has been the leading American in the Socialist International, and he's a dangerous man. I think he's an honest man. I think he obviously believes what he's talking about. He's very credible in that regard, but he's wrong. He's terribly wrong.
Right.
And for him to serve in the United States Congress, where he takes an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, it's an absurdity.
Isn't that amazing? That is absolutely amazing. And
I've always stated on radio shows and speeches and everything else that America became great not because of what government did. America became great because of what government was prevented from doing by the Constitution of the United States. If the Constitution were fully enforced as it exists right now, the federal government would be 20% its size and 20% its cost. And wouldn't that be wonderful?
And the world would be a lot more peaceful place.
The world would be a lot more peaceful, right. And we wouldn't have American forces dying in vain in Korea and in Iraq and in Vietnam and so on and so on.
Right.
Now, not too many people realize that the war in Vietnam, where we suffered the most casualties of all these wars, the war in Vietnam was overseen by SEATO, SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. And SEATO was formed under permission granted by the United Nations. Articles 51, 2, 3, and 4 of the UN Charter talk about regional organizations. NATO is one of those. SEATO was one of those. After the war in Vietnam, SEATO was abolished, but they ran the war. They conducted it. And you talk to anybody who served there and said, well, they didn't allow us to win. We could have won that war. Everybody knew that they could have won that war, but they weren't allowed to. And the same has been said for certainly in Korea. You know, the state of war still exists in Korea.
Oh, yeah.
There never has been a settlement of that.
Right, it's a ceasefire.
That's right.
Right now, it's a 70-year ceasefire.
It's a ceasefire, but it's not an end of the war. The state of war still exists. Could break out any day, tomorrow even. And again, who ran the war in Korea? Well, the UN did. Not only did they win, they run it. They even sent their flags over, and flags of the United Nations flew over our troops in Korea. And and a lot of the generals and even down to the sergeants and privates began to suspect the United Nations, and so a lot of those flags got taken down, but they were there. And another reason to get out of the United Nations. On and on we go.
Sure.
But what does anybody do about this? Anybody who's listening? Well, I wrote a small book, about 50 pages, called America and the United Nations. And copies of that are available from the John Birch Society. You can go to jbs.org on the internet and go to the what they call Shop JBS, and you can order copies of it. I think it only costs $3 or something. You know, get a bunch of them, start spreading them around, get people to read the book, and when they do, I've had skeptics that I've met here and there, and I've given them a copy, and I come back and see them in about 10 days, and I'll never forget one fellow. He said, my attitude about the John Birch Society is completely changed. He says, I read your book, your 50-page book. I couldn't put it down. I read it all in one evening. I said, well, good for you, and I hope a lot of more people will do the same.
Well, John, I have to tell you, that little book you're talking about, I ordered several hundred copies years and years ago, and gave out. We had some of our Liberty rallies in the area here, and that was a favorite reading material was that little book, and I ordered in big enough quantities. John Birch Society does a really excellent job of providing a lot of these publications at a very inexpensive price if you order in large quantities. And I'd also recommend to our listeners who have not heard your DVD, The Overview of America. We played that thing. My wife got to the point she said, "Oh God, do I have to listen to that again?" We must have played it a couple hundred times for different Liberty functions that we had, and it explains in 22 minutes in a way that defines the difference between America, difference between our Constitution and other forms of government, and it's something that I think everyone should hear. John, we're kind of running toward the end of the program here. I'll give you a minute or two to talk about the John Birch Society and some of the other publications and things that you would like our listeners to go to. And we do have that on our website as well, but give you the last few minutes to kind of wrap up.
Well, one of the things I recommend, of course, is our magazine. We put out a magazine called The New American, and it comes out every second week. And I've had people in the Washington, D.C. area. There's a lot of groups down there, some conservatives and some people that dally and this and that, and single-issue groups and so forth. And over again, I get told by these people who are friendly that our magazine, The New American, is so far the best that there's nobody, we don't even know who's in second place. Your magazine, and they say this even if they have their own magazine. They say your magazine is the best. There's no doubt about it. And so I'm very proud of that, and we would like to see many more people subscribe to the magazine. You can get a sample issue of that by just simply going to Shop JBS, order a book or two, and then ask for a sample of the magazine, and they'll send one to you. And you can get a chance to look at it. The years I've been the publisher of the magazine, I've kind of stepped up a little bit now. I'm not the publisher anymore. In fact, I'm not even the president of the Birch Society. I'm now president emeritus, as I've grown in the years. The years are catching up on me, but I still do a lot of radio shows, as you've certainly found out this evening.
You do well.
I do a lot of writing. I write a blog for the John Birch Society. And anybody can go to the internet and go to Inside JBS blog, and you'll find out what I have to say about the events of the day and some history thrown in as well. So, Dan, it's been a pleasure to be your guest. I hope that there are some people who've listened to this that will take action and go to jbs.org on the internet and get themselves some information from the Birch Society and help us to save our country and to get back to the Constitution.
Well, I thank you for being our guest, and I have to say I have been a subscriber of the New American for, I think now about 8 or 9 years, and in 2008 I ran across a copy in the airport, and they were talking about the housing bubble. And it was when I happened to be on my way to visit with my kids and talk to them about the coming collapse of the economy. That was, about January or February 2008. And I ran across that magazine, and I thought, boy, these people really know what they're doing. And that's when I started subscribing. You're absolutely...
Oh, good. We're glad to have you as a subscriber. I figured you must be.
Well, I am, and I look forward to 2 magazines above all else, The New American and Range Magazine, which is a kind of a Western publication, and I may try to see if I can have the C.J. Hadley, the publisher, send you a copy. I think you'd really enjoy that one too.
Yeah, I would. I think I've seen it in the past, but I'd certainly like to see a current issue if you could do that for me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you being on the show, and I do have some personal friends that are associated with the John Birch Society that I have done Constitution classes with Robert Brown, and been in the legislature, and we've actively argued against these groups that want to have a con.
And, we don't want to have a constitutional convention. We'd lose the Constitution if we ever had one.
Absolutely. How in the world would we want to trust anybody to redesign such a wonderful document when the whole system has been completely corrupted?
Right. We don't need to amend it. We need to get back to it.
Exactly. Well, with that said, I hope you will consider being our guest again at some point down the road, and I certainly appreciate having you.
Well, you know how to get a hold of me, Dan. I'll be happy to be back on your program sometime in the near future.
Very good. I really look forward to that as well, and I would like to invite our listeners to please join us again next week for another program of Connecting the Dots. And thank you. And Kelby, I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you, Dan Happel, and thank you to our special guest. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to conclude the RNN show for this week. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. Good night.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand.